Welcome back to Kivumbi 2017. It is now 20 minutes to 7 right here, and the discussion is 20 minutes to 8, I beg your pardon. And, well, what we're talking about here is NASA's move now to go to the Supreme Court and what they made their decision to do. But just a quick introduction of the guests that we have this morning. We have Peter Wanyama, who is a lawyer and also a political analyst, and we also have John Kagushia. And we've already gone into the discussion, but even as NASA moves to the Supreme Court, they are seeking just one outcome, justice. But listen to the following statement that sounds like a blackmail from NASA's leader, Raila Odinga.
Even as we go to court, we are cognizant of the fact that ever since Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto publicly won the judiciary, the IEBC has not lost a single case in court. We have decided to move to the Supreme Court, despite the history and other recent circumstances. In similar circumstances, in 2013, we moved to the Supreme Court to challenge the declaration by IEBC of Uhuru as president-elect. The manner in which the court handled that petition was a travesty of justice. The court decided all interim applications in favor of Mr. Kenyatta. The court also allowed the counter-petition filed in favor of Kenyatta, but disallowed the two petitions against him. Uhuru won 100% and we lost 100% in court. Our decision to go to court constitutes a second chance for the Supreme Court. The court can use this chance to redeem itself, or like in 2013, it can compound the problems we face as a country.
And yes, that's a statement that he made. Let me start with you, John. From that particular statement, does that sound like somebody who's confident that they have enough evidence and are going to go through the Supreme Court? Or is it like a disclaimer that we're going to court, but we're not quite confident that we'll get justice? So one is left wondering, then why pursue the Supreme Court if you're not confident?
You know, Mike, first, I do not think that the allegations that Raila Odinga makes just before that statement, that after the Jubilee principles want the High Court or the courts of law, then Kenyatta and IEBC have not lost case after that. I do not think that is entirely the fact. Actually, that is not true. Again, also, you know, that kind of tends to put Uhuru and IEBC on the same platform, again, which is not the case, because the cases that were in court, a lot of them which were actually clarifications, which IEBC was seeking, and most of them anyway were issues of NASA or some of the civil societies which had actually taken IEBC to court. A lot of times, Jubilee actually stayed off some of those cases. They actually did not even want to be, you know, even enjoined in those cases. So that is not entirely the case. But then when you look at the issue of saying that the courts do have an opportunity now to redeem their image or to redeem themselves, or particularly the Supreme Court, that to me sounds more like the same issue that was raised before the election, which had to do with losing and winning the election. You know, NASA had put it very clearly that the only way Jubilee can win the election is if they rig. You know, ideally meaning that NASA had to win the election for the election to be credible. And to the extent that NASA does not win the election, then the election was not credible. You know, when you put it that way, then, you know, it becomes a very big problem. And I see the same now thing happening here, where you're saying that now you have an opportunity to redeem yourself. And that basically means that you've got to give us this case, you've got to make us win this case. And if we don't win this case, then you have compounded the problems of this country. Now, that looks like, to me like a blackmail, as you rightly put it. And what I would want to point out is that I do not think that the Supreme Court will be controlled, as David Maraga again said, as the CJ. He said very clearly that the court will not be under control of any political party or any person. You remember when Jubilee had actually demanded that Justice Odunga be transferred or not be given cases which have to do with this electoral dispute. And Justice was very, the Chief Justice was very clear and very candid and very firm that he is not going to take any step against any of his judges based on political convenience for any politician or any political party. And so he has put it very clearly that the judges are objective. They're going to be, they're going to carry out their work in a credible manner, in a way that they are going to bring out justice. I think what Raila Odinga will need to do is really to prove his case. It is a case of facts. It's a legal fact that have to be put on the table and convince the judges that indeed the 1.4 million votes that Uhuru got in excess of what Raila Odinga got were from a computer-generated, kind of an election. So it's purely about the fact that he has to prove in court.
Peter, your thoughts on that? Is that the voice of a confident person going to court, number one? And number two, that particular statement that it's time for the courts, it's an opportunity for the courts to redeem themselves. Is that almost saying that the only redemption that the courts can give is if they win? Regardless of they've not even presented the evidence that they have.
That statement is intriguing in two perspectives. I think Raila, by making those statements, is trying to argue his case in the court of public opinion. Because the court of public opinion, and of course he has many supporters, will believe what he says. And remember, judges are not from Mars of Jupiter. Judges are actually human beings.
Right.
They are affected by they have personal biases, idiosyncrasies. They are affected by feelings, emotion, and even politics. And Raila knows that. And therefore, I think that statement is meant to appeal to that part of judging. Because judging is not an art of perfection. It is inspired by all those issues. So I believe it is meant to appeal to that part of judging. Him coming to the Supreme Court and saying that, in 2013 you did me injustice, now it is time for
you to do me justice.
Unfortunately, courts of law don't operate that way. Secondly, in a court of law, courts are not necessarily courts of justice. They are courts of law as well. And in that sense, I mean that there are certain issues that really are very, very key. One is that you don't come to court with suppositions and assumptions and what ifs in terms of evidence, then you expect the court to do you justice. No. First of all, you come to court and you ensure that you comply with all the rules which you're supposed to comply with. And by this statement, I mean that you really must live to the hallowed principle in law that procedure is the handmaiden of justice. In 2013, Raila terms the decision as a travesty of justice for the reason that his evidence, the 900-page affidavit, was rejected. But was there legal justification for that rejection? Yes, there was legal justification. From a moral perspective, it would have been so unjust. But there are certain procedures and requirements which you must follow for you to file a presidential petition. If you miss one of those requirements, then that means you are...
That's just a legal process.
And these requirements are constitutional. They have been put there for the reason that they're only 14 days. So you can, for instance, court can make an application now to access the IEBC data. And then it takes 10 days or 15 days to produce a report. That then will affect the constitution timelines. So procedure must be followed. So on the other perspective is that courts are really not supposed to be influenced by political perceptions, even though they may have them in
their own personal bias.
Absolutely, they can have them back in the mind when they are deciding, but they are bound by law to decide cases strictly based on the evidence. And there's a principle which protects judicial decision-making, that is independence of the judiciary. As a judge, you're supposed to decide cases without being affected by external circumstances, in this case, political statements from dominant leaders.
All right, we need to wind up. And John, part of the statement, if you listen carefully to Raila Odinga, is that he mentioned and said that the Supreme Court is not the only option that they're pursuing. They're still going to also pursue other options. Maybe as we wind up, what other options do they have apart from the Supreme Court?
The opposition have been narrowed now to only that option. You can remember this was actually not even an option, meaning there were other options before which were to be followed. Unfortunately, and for one reason or another, they have not been able to pursue those other options. The issue of civil disobedience and mass protest, of course, was one of the main options that they had. And indeed, they had already appealed to it and they were actually following it. But what happened after that is that the protests were only in very few isolated areas in Kenya. And the larger part of the country just bounced back into life, as opposed to what the NASA and opposition had hoped and had expected. And for that reason, the impact of the protest and civil disobedience that they were pursuing was minimal in the country, because this was only experienced mainly in Kisumu and just a few parts of Nairobi. And this did not reflect very well, because when it comes to the issue of civil disobedience, I think Mudavadi in his stronghold, he did not deliver as much. Kalonzo in his stronghold did not deliver as much. In fact, Isaac Ruto actually kind of just disappeared from the scene. And in fact, what we have seen happening, especially like in eastern Ukambani area, we have actually seen even the chairman of Wiper Party himself coming up with a delegation saying, we are going to work with the government. Again, you'll also remember that the governors who have already been elected wouldn't want to have any problems when they are starting their work. Look at Anyang' Nyong'o. He's looking at civil disobedience and protests and demos coming to destroy Kisumu. Then where does he start as a governor? It becomes very difficult. Look at Hassan Joho. If you start protests and civil disobedience in Mombasa, then you chase away or you scare away all the tourists. Then that brings down the economy of Mombasa. And then him as a governor, he starts by failing. So for that reason, then it becomes extremely difficult for that option to be tenable. In fact, the only option that was left was only going to court or just conceding defeat. And because conceding defeat then wouldn't augur very well for the psychological well-being of NASA supporters, then this is a better way, because then even the opposition leaders will show that they actually did what they were expected to do, and they did not just throw in the towel. So I do not think they have any other options up their sleeves. If the Supreme Court fails, then that will be it. And I do not think they will be able to pursue any other option whatsoever.
Effectively.
Yeah.
All right. Peter, your thoughts, and as you wind up, we're out of time. Your thoughts and closing comments.
I think in terms of really the options which Raila Odinga has, is that you need to look at it in that perspective of an outcome, an objective. What is the objective of Raila going to the court? Because he wants the presidential results annulled, and so that we can have a fresh presidential election. And therefore, if you look at the options, every option must have an objective. If he goes to the street, so what will be his objective of going to the street?
Maybe just
to destabilize government, to
and to show that the 6 million people that voted for him are unhappy.
To push for minimum constitutional and legal reforms, to push for social justice and accountability. Because the street option will not lead to change of leadership at the top. It can only lead to minimum constitutional and legal reforms. It can lead to governance, and perhaps it can be a tool to oversight this government so that they don't, in his opinion, then run the country in the manner they want. So really, for Raila Odinga, my advice is that they should, just like in 2013, they should participate in the court process and abide by the outcome. In 2013, both Raila and Uhuru came out to accept the decision of the Supreme Court. Even though he didn't like it, he called it a travesty of justice. But at least he came out and accepted. So this time round, what I really expect from Raila Odinga is to ensure that whatever decision that the Supreme Court, both Raila Odinga and Uhuru, whatever decision that the Supreme Court renders, they must publicly accept that decision, even though they may not like certain issues maybe in that particular decision, because that will then lay basis for national healing and reconciliation. And of course, that means that that will not be the end of Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga remains, if he loses, he remains the icon of Kenyan politics. He can still check the government even when he is not in power.
Still as opposition. John?
Yeah, just the last one. If Raila had gotten a sizable number of MPs or lawmakers in both Senate and Parliament, and governors also, he would have had a very good way of controlling, mobilizing and controlling the system.
Impeach the president.
Even impeachment and all that. But unfortunately now, almost two-thirds of parliament and the lawmakers actually now have gone to the Jubilee side. So this comes with even a bigger problem than it was before them, because there's the tyranny of numbers has almost doubled for Jubilee government.
What he's saying is that it'll be easier to impeach even if Raila wins.
Yeah,
it's very easy to impeach him.
He would actually be impeached.
If he had the numbers
yeah,
in Parliament
actually
and
be impeached the
Senate.
following day.
All right,
now,
gentlemen.
because the president has actually extended a hand of friendship and cooperation with the opposition, I think the best option maybe then would be to then listen to the president and ask what is it that, how can we work together as a country and heal and unite this country.
All right, thank you very much, Peter Wanyama, who is a lawyer and also a political analyst, and John Kagushia, who is a governance expert. That is the State of the Nation right here on Kivumbi 2017. And we want to take a short break, but we still have more news that are making headlines. And we'll be right back, so do stay with us right here on Kivumbi 2017.